scheduling. Okay. Okay, so for last class, or before the last couple of classes, we talk about the CPU scheduling. So we first talk about like some of the scheduling, like FIFO, and also shortest job first, and shortest remaining time first. Okay. Now, I hope that you should be able to, if I give you a couple of processes and the CPU time for each of the processes, and then you should be able to calculate the total actually CPU time based on each of the scheduling algorithm. How can you calculate each of this? So you can take a look at the example we talk about, and then for these are basically for FIFO, as shortest job first and shortest remaining time first. These are basically for mostly the batch system. Now, for the interactive system, we basically talk about round robin. Okay, round robin is actually, it's pretty fair for round robin, because the round robin going to allocate the same amount of time for each of the processes, and this amount of time is called the time quantum. So then the scheduler going to actually allocate one time quantum, up to one time quantum for process one, and when the process one complete this one time quantum, then the scheduler going to actually move the process one away and allocate the process two for also for one time quantum, and then allocate process three for one time quantum. So basically, each process is going to take a short period of time, just one time quantum, and then switch to another process. So you're going to basically switch back and forth among these processes every time quantum. So also, you should be able to calculate what's the CPU time for for each of the process. Okay. So that's basically, we talk about this is called what is called turnaround. This CPU time is called a turnaround time. Okay. Turnaround time for each process. So the turnaround time, just keep that in mind. Turnaround time is the period of time for each process. That the turnaround time can be calculated by look at the process is requested for the CPU, the time the process arrives, and also what's the time the process complete its job. Okay, so this time period is turnaround time. So if process one arrive at the time 0, finish at the time t, finish at the time at the 10 time unit, then turnaround time is 10. If process 2 arrive at the time 3 and then finish at the time 12, so arrive at the time 3, finish at the time 12. So the turnaround time going to be 12 minus 3, which is 9. So you should be able to calculate the turnaround time. And also, you should be able to calculate. Now, turnaround time is for each process. So each process has its turnaround time. But if you want to talk about average turnaround time, you need to calculate the average of each of the turnaround time. So if you have 4 processes, then you should calculate the average of turnaround times for these 4 processes. So if the turnaround time for 4 processes are T1, T2, T3, T4, so this is turnaround time for process 1, turnaround time for process 2, turnaround time for process 3, and turnaround time for process 4. And then the average is going to be the sum of these turnaround time divided by the number of process, which is 4. Okay, you should be able to do that. And also for the interactive process, we also talk about the multi-level queue, right? So it's called a multi-level, and then there's a multi-level feedback, MLF. Okay, so these are called the multi-level feedback scheduling. So multi-level scheduling. Now you need to know the difference between multi-level and the multi-level feedback. Multi-level basically means you have a couple of levels of queue, and the top level has the highest priority, and mostly each of the level used a round robin, and at the top level, the highest priority queue should have a small time quantum, and the next highest level of queue normally doubles the time quantum, and then next level doubles the time quantum, so the time quantum doubles. Okay, so um, for multi-level queue, basically now each process has a priority. The highest priority actually process is going to be allocated to the highest the level queue, and then the next level of process allocate to the next level of queue. Okay, so for multi-level feedback, it's slightly different. It still have multi-level queue, and it still have the time quantum for each level of queue. Okay, so for example, if I have 5 levels, and this is level 5, level 4, level 3, level 2, level 1, and then there's a time quantum. So for example, the time quantum is 1, and the next level, level 4, which has a lower priority than level 5, and the time quantum going to be 2, and then the quantum going to be 4, 8, 16. So it's always doubles. Okay. Now for multi-level, so each process depend on the priority of the process. The highest priority process is going to be allocated to the level 5 queue, and the next highest priority process is going to be allocated to the level 4 queue. And these are, for example, couple of process. Now the scheduler can actually pick the processes in the highest level queue and start to run it. Okay, these, if you have a 3 actual process at the highest level queue, and these actual process can actually follow the round robin, scheduling. So each process is going to take a turn to, to get the CPU. Uh, the, now, for the next level not going to be able to run until the higher level queue is empty. Then the next level process going to be able to run, and then they're also going to follow the round robin algorithm. So each level actually follow its own round robin algorithm with different time quantum. Now multi-level feedback queue is kind of different. It's basically, so for every process, once it's actually once the process arrives, the process always going to allocate to the high level queue, the level 5. And then once it's actually the process has been run for one time quantum, then if it's not finished, then it's finished. If it's not finished, then remaining CPU time going to be, for the remaining part, it will be allocated to the next level queue. And then once its time arrives, it's going to actually execute for, in the next level. And if it's still not finished, and put in the next level, put in the next level. So if the process is very long, so it will be put in first, initially put in the high level queue, and then execute for small portion of the CPU time. And then for the remaining time, it will be actually put in the next queue, and then put in the next queue. So multi-level feedback scheduling is kind of a scheduling algorithm that treat all the process going to be the same. Initially, the newly arrived process has the highest priority. If the process cannot finish in level 5 queue, it will put it in the level 4 queue, and the priority of the process actually just downgraded a level. And if it's still not finished in the level 4, it will be put in the level 3. So the process, as the time goes by, the priority of the process is going to be smaller and smaller. Okay. So this is actually multi-level feedback queue. Now, all these scheduling algorithms are called best effort scheduling algorithm, which means if I have multiple processes, the scheduling algorithms basically just pick the next process to run based on what the scheduling algorithm is. But there's no hard time limit. There's no such a restriction says this process has to be finished within certain time. There's no such restriction. Only just tells about which process going to be run first, which process going to be able to run next, which process going to be able to run next. But there's no time limit in terms of which process has to be finished before certain time. So these are called the best effort. It just talk about which one going to be executed before which one. Okay. Now, the real time process is kind of different. Okay. A real-time process is characterized by, continual input, which must be processed fast enough to generate nearly instantaneous output. Okay. So if the process is created, if it's a real-time process, then this process, once it's created, there's a time limit, which means you have to actually execute the process and you have to finish before certain time. Okay. So this is actually a real-time process. So each arrival import items is subject to the deadline. Okay. Now, there are many examples of the real-time process. For example, streaming audio and video. Okay. If you actually use the internet to communicate. Okay. Now, when I speak, just like right now, when I speak, my voice gonna be actually, my voice is gonna be eventually create a kind of a voice file. Uh, it's certain format of voice file like an MP3 or uh, any kind of a voice format. So, but when I actually for real time voice, so that means my voice has to be transmitted and reach the destination within certain time, constraint. So that means, for example, if you actually two people are communicating on the telephone, so if I speak, my voice has to reach you within like a second. Okay. Now, if I speak and you are listening, and then my voice actually reach you after 1 minute, that's not real time application. So you can do this like an email, or you can actually send a message like a voice message, and you can leave a voice message and send to the destination as an attachment, and then it's fine. I don't want you to listen to my voice within 1 second. You can actually listen to my voice after an hour, 2 hours. So that's not real-time process. The real-time process has a a very strict time limit. Okay. The other example for the real time is like some kind of message, control message in an airplane, in a car, like all these autopilot software for the vehicle. So in this case, now the vehicle has a lot of radar or sensor. So when the radar detects an object before the vehicle, so then the sensor basically inform the computer system, say, hey, there's an object before it, like an object like within like 100 feet. And then the computer has to execute the process and complete the execution within a second, because otherwise the vehicle going to hit the object. So it's going to cause some kind of car accident. So that's a real-time process. So in real-time process, there's a particular thing. So a period is a time interval within which each import item must be processed. Okay. So the end of each period is the implicit deadline for processing the current item. So normally people are going to say for real-time process, you either actually complete the process or fail within certain time or fail. Okay. If you actually cannot execute the process before actually certain deadline, then it failed. It's just actually failed. You cannot say, okay, there's a delay. There's no such thing as delay. Delay means failed. Okay. So there are typically two kind of real-time scheduling algorithm. One actually scheduling algorithm is called the rate monotonic RM algorithm. Okay. This RM algorithm schedules process according to the period. Okay. So for each process, you have to define a period for the process. Now, the period basically means if the period is number, for example, like I have two processes here. Both of these processes are real-time process. And I define the first process, P1, has a period of 4. And the second process has a period of 5. So that means the first process has to, once it's actually requested for the CPU, it has been processed and completed within 4 time unit. Okay. So that's the 4 basically means the time units, the process has to be completed. Okay. And process 2 has a 5 period. Okay. So the shorter the period, the higher the priority. The shorter the period, that means this process has a more urgency to complete. So if the one process say period 4, the other process say period 10, that means the second process say, oh, I have a period of time. That means don't worry, you can, as far as you complete the process within 10 time unit, then it's fine. But the 4 period basically means you have to complete me before actually 4 time units. Okay. So that's, and also it just gave you the total CPU burst for each process. Now, this is general rule. The period has to be larger than the total CPU actually total CPU time. Okay, CPU burst. Because if I just say process 2, just request to say I request the CPU, and because the process 2 is a period 5, that means from the time when I request for CPU, you have to complete it in 5 time units. So that means you have to complete it before that time. Okay. So if you arrive here, then the period is 5. Okay, that's a period. So then you have to finish before this. So that means if you arrive at this particular time, say I just say time 3, okay? So then because the period is 5, so that means if the process 2 arrive in a request for CPU at the time 3, and then you have to complete my request at the time 8 because the period is 5, so it's 8 minus 3. So that means now if the CPU burst is 3 time units, so that means if I actually request for CPU at the time 3, and the CPU the scheduler immediately allocate the process 2, then the process 2 start to execute at the time 3, then the CPU burst is 3, so it will be finished 3, 4, 5, 6 at the time 6, which is fine because 6 is less than 8, right? Now, if I actually request for 3 and the actual scheduler start to actually execute the process 2 at the time 4, it's still fine because the CPU burst is 3, right? So you can finish before 7. Okay, it's still okay. Now you can actually request at time 3. Say at the time 3, I request for CPU, and I get the CPU at the time 5, which is still okay because if you start at time 5, you can still actually barely meet the deadline. However, if CPU request at time 3, the period is 5, and the total CPU burst is 3, and then the scheduler actually allocate the CPU time at the time 3, 4, 5, at the time 5, then that's a problem because that process requires 3 time unit. Okay, so the complete time will be 9, which is actually already past the time 8. So that means this will fail. Okay. So just keep that in mind. So once you define the time period, if the total actually CPU burst is small, that's good. That gave you actually schedule some kind of room to schedule the CPU process. Even though it's a little bit late, still going to be able to make it because the CPU burst is short. But if the period is 5 and the total CPU times 3, which is 3 is actually smaller than 5, but 3 is actually very close to 5. Now, even worse is if I actually period is 5 and the total CPU burst is 4, then that means for this process, it does not give the scheduler much room because you have to actually schedule this process very quickly. Otherwise, the completed time will definitely past the deadline. So, okay. So now let's take a look at this example. So I have two processes, process 1 and process 2. And data says process 1 has a period of 4 and the CPU burst is 1. Process 2 actually period 5, CPU burst is 3, right? So the process 1 has higher priority because the period is smaller. Now, typically, if I run a process, so if I process request for CPU at this time, if process request for CPU at the time 0, because the period is 4, that means that request has to be completed at the time 4, right? Because the period is 4. So now the total CPU burst is 1. So now once process requested for CPU and it get to CPU, so it's actually complete the process at the time 1, which is actually far ahead of time. So that's good, right? And then after period 4, the next CPU process requested for next CPU request and the CPU burst is still 1. So you can actually run this. And then the next one is 8. So each one represent a period. This is actually the time period. So each time request at the beginning of the period, it requests for CPU, and because the CPU burst is 1, so each time it will get a chance to run. So you are way ahead of time to complete this. So this is actually in good shape. Okay. Also for process 2, the period is 5. The CPU burst is 3. Now, if you actually request for CPU and get the CPU immediately, you are in good shape. So that's next period. That's next period. So every time when the period start, it start to execute the process and finish in 3 time unit, right? So, and also 3 time unit. That's not a problem. If there's only one process, one real-time process is running, no problem. Because this process is a processor, the computer system is dedicated to the process. So there should be no problem. Now the problem may arise if you have 2 real-time processes. They fight for the CPU. Here's an example. I have 2 processes, okay, multi-process environment. Now these 2 processes have different period of time. Now if I use the real-time RM, the rate monotonic scheduling algorithm, that means I always allocate the high priority process. So the process 1 always has a higher priority than process 2. So every time when process 1 requests for CPU and the process 2 is using the CPU, you always do the preemptive. You're always going to kick the process. Process 1 always going to be able to kick the process 2 out, no matter what happens. Okay, so that's the RM scheduling. So now let's see how this actually things are going to work. So process 1 arrive at the time 0. Process 1 arrived at time 0. Okay, and also process 2 arrived at time 0. It doesn't matter because process 1 always get the CPU because process 1 has higher priority than process 2 because the process 1 has a shorter period. Once the process get the CPU, process 1 start to execute and complete the job at the time 1, way before the first period, which is actually time 4. So once the process 1 complete the job, okay, now process 2 also requests the CPU, but it has a period of 5. So it has to wait until process 1 complete the job, and then the process 2 gonna actually start to run. Okay. Now, once the process 1 start, okay, so the process 1 is start. So it just need to complete at the time 5. But this is okay because process 1 started at the time 1. So it's finished at the time 4. So which is still less than 5, right? Because the period is 5. So you have to finish before 5, but it actually finished way ahead of time. It's before finish at the 4. Okay. Now when process 2 finish at the 4, so then it's basically the start of the next period for process 1 because the first period actually end at the 4. So the next period from 4 to 8, that's a period for process 1. And it get the CPU again. Once this one get the CPU, okay, now it just actually finished at time 5. So way ahead of time 8. That's okay. However, right after the process 1 finish the execution at the time 5, now it's the beginning of process 2, right? The next period for process 2, because from 0 to 5, that's period 1 for process 2, and period 2 is 5 to 10. So process 2 actually start at the next period, and the process 2 immediately get the CPU, because process 1 just finished the CPU, and the next period hasn't started yet. So process 1 is not available. Only process 2 is available. So process 2 gonna actually start the process. Now, once the process 1 to finish at the time 8, now process 1 becomes available, because that's the next period for process 1. And then process 1 again finish at the time 9. Now, when process 1 finish at the time 9, then you will find out process 2 is not available yet, because process 2, this period actually, the second period end at 10. So, but process 1 finished the job at 9. So process 1 is not available. Process 2 is not available. So in this time period, both processes are not available. Okay, both processes are not available. But at the time 10, process 2 is available. Process 1 is still not available, because process 1 will be available at the time 12. Okay, so then process 2 start. Okay, now process 2 start and run, continue to run until time 12. At the time 12, so process 2 hasn't finished, because process the CPU burst for process 2 is 3, but process 2 started at 10, and at the time 12, process 2 only finished 2 time unit, and there's still 1 time unit left, because the CPU burst is 3, so only halfway through. But process 1 says, okay, my next time period is start at the 12. So in this case, process 2 is in the CPU, and the process 1 is available. Now what happens? With RM, the short process with short period has a higher priority. So that means the process 1 gonna kick the process 2 out. Okay, the process 1 start to execute. Okay, now once the process 1 execute, and this period is gonna end at the 16, right? But it's finished at the 13. So when process 1 finish, the process 1 is not available, and then the process 2 gonna be resumed. Okay, because it's gonna complete the leftover. Okay, so then, which is fine. So it can actually complete. Okay, so at this time period, because the next time period for process 1 is 16, the next time period for process 2 is 15, right? Because process 2 is always period 5, 15. So again, at this time period, both processes are not available. Now at the time 15, which process is gonna get the CPU? At the time 15, which process is gonna get the CPU?
Wouldn't it be process 2 for 1 second and then immediately kicked off after?
We're gonna be get the CPU, but not for long, because once the time reaches 16, the process say, okay, my period ends, right? So next period is start. So I can actually request for CPU again. So then the process 1 gonna be able to get the CPU again. But process 1 won't keep the CPU for long, because the CPU burst is only for one time unit, and then the process 2 gonna continue. Okay. This is 17, this is 18, and this is 19. So it will finish at the 19. Okay. So 16, and I think now next one For this time period, the non-process is available. But at the time 20, both process 1 and process 2 are available. Okay, so not in this case, the process 1 get the CPU again, right? And the process 2 has to wait. So basically, so both process basically fight for the CPU, but every time when the next period arrives for process 1 always take the CPU. It doesn't matter whether currently process 2 is in the CPU or not, whether process 2 hasn't finished or not. It will preempt and allocate the process 1. Okay, once the process 1 finished, and then allocate the process 2. Now, in this particular case, looks like the cycle going to continue because you start at the 20 again, just like at the beginning. So you're going to complete the next cycle like this. But you realize that there's a risk because process 1 always has a high priority. So the process 1 always going to be able to preempt the process 2. So in that case, there's a risk that if you got more processes, for this 2-process scheme, it's okay. But if you got more processes, process 2 may fail, right? So maybe sooner or later, process 2 there might be a situation that the process 2 may actually end up that cannot complete a CPU burst within a period. So that there's a risk with this. But it's actually, in this particular case, it's okay. It's working.
Professor, what would happen if, say, P2 wasn't able to complete a CPU burst in the period? Would it like just stop running P2?
Yes. Normally, the operating system is gonna give you a system error, say process 2 actually failed, because for real-time process, if it failed, it just failed. It's not going to be able to continue. So when you design the real-time actually scheduling, you have to make sure that the real-time process never going to fail. If it fail, the consequence is going to be fatal. You know. Now, sometimes in certain case, like there's now, for example, like a airplane. Now, you should design the scheduling algorithm which will make sure that the real-time process never going to fail. You know, this is going to be a big problem if real-time process fail, like a fly-by-wire. So you control this, you want to actually take off, and you actually, lift the stick, and the airplane never take off. That's a big problem because eventually, if the runway is short, then the airplane gonna crash. You see what I mean? So you're never gonna, for real-time process, there should be no scenario that the real-time process is gonna fail. It's never gonna fail. Now, however, in certain real-time application, it's called soft real-time. In that case, like playing a video. So I play the movie. Now, so typically, so you have to actually continue to supply the video fraction, right? So the movie gonna play by keep supplying the image. You typically you should supply the image like a 60 image per second, 60 image, 60 frame per second. So you have to provide a 60 frame per second. Now, if you fail this kind of real-time application, what happens? Your movie probably going to be frozen, right? So that's typically what happens when you actually have a streaming video. Streaming video is a real-time application, but this real-time application is not really that critical. Not like a fly-by-wire or the real-time process that control the vehicle, these real-time process should never fail, you know. But for the movie, well, so even though you should not fail the real-time process, but if they fail, what's a big deal, right? Because you just actually see like the movie just frozen, you know. It's not continue to play. So just you should know the differences between sometimes called hard real time and the soft real time. You know, hard real time like a fly-by-wires, autopilot, you know, autopilot control for the for like electrical vehicle, or like a control system for the nuclear power plant. Now these real time process should never fail. Okay. But in general, the rule of thumb is that if you have if you have to mix the process, like a real-time process and a non-real-time processes, you always guarantee that the real-time process always get the top priority. You know, technically should never fail the real-time processes. Any questions? Yeah. So failing the real-time process always going to have a consequences. Whether it's a fatal or not, that's depend on the application. Like a video, you play the string video, then you will experience some kind of quality issue, right? So if you keep doing this, like if you actually subscribe for Netflix or subscribe for some kind of the program, and if you always experience things like this, you will probably give up. You're not going to sign up, you know, sign up for the Netflix again, because I'm not going to be able to see the videos smoothly. But that's okay. You know, it's not it's a problem, but that's not fatal. But the other hard real time application, then you have to seriously consider that either you're going to upgrade the system to actually make the hardware more powerful, so they can actually have enough CPU time to deal with that kind of processes. That's called RM scheduling. The other approach is called EDF scheduling, which basically stands for earliest deadline first. The earliest deadline first algorithm, they don't actually, they prioritize based on the shorter remaining time. Okay, the shorter remaining time. Now let's take a look at the same example to see what's the difference. Okay. So based on the EF or RM, based on the RM, process 1 always has high priority, right? Because the period is smaller. Even though in certain cases, process 2 has more urgency to finish because process 2 has a longer CPU burst. So in certain cases, it has more urgency. But this is actually stubborn because the period of P1 is shorter than P2. So always has high priority. They don't consider the burst time for P1 is shorter. So in that case, most of the time, if you miss one time unit or 2 time unit, it's still going to be okay because it's not going to keep the CPU for very long. But this one's actually not. If you miss certain time, then it will not be able to complete, you know, on time, in time. So now EDF, the earliest deadline first, is kind of different. Okay. So this algorithm is going to schedule the process according to the shortest remaining time until the deadline. Okay. Now take a look at this case. So the deadline for each period is like this. So for deadline is here, okay, for P1. And deadline is here for the next period. And the next period, deadline is here, and deadline is here. Okay, the deadline for P2 is here for the first period, and the second deadline is here, and the third deadline is here. Okay, now you take a look. So both actually request for the CPU, okay, at the time 0. So then you check the deadline. So this one has a shorter deadline, right? So this one gonna actually get the CPU first. And then once you finish, then this one get the CPU next. Okay. Now once it's finished, the process 1, the next starting point period start at here. So it will get the CPU because that's the only one available. And then after process 1 finished at the time 5, process 2 is available because that's the second period, the beginning of the second period. The process 2 actually get the CPU, run for 3 time unit, and then they reach the 8. So then process 1 is available at the time 8 and start to execute. Okay, and now things gonna happen. So when process 1 finish at the time 9, so then the next actually period start at the 12, right? And then when process 2 actually finish at the 8, and then at the 10, process 2 start its next time period. So the process 2 can start to execute. Okay. Now, when the process 2 actually reaches destination, reaches actually time 12, that's the time that the process 1 is available, right? Now, process 1 is available. Okay. However, process 2 is actually in the CPU. So based on the RM, the previous scheduling algorithm, because process 1 has a higher priority than process 2, so it's going to preempt and let the process 1 execute at this time 12, right? But this is not. The EDF, the earliest deadline first, basically at this time, it will check the remaining time. So it says the remaining time for process 2 is 1. Okay. The process 1 is also has 1. So in that case, okay, now both has a 1. So that means the priority is the same because I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, not this. The process 1 is here, okay? At the time 12, process 1 arrives. Now, I'm sorry, it's not the shortest actually, it's the shortest the earliest deadline first, not the shortest job. So now what I'm going to check is, okay, now process 2 has 1 time unit remaining. Process 1 requires the CPU. But then the scheduler going to check the deadline. Which one has the earliest deadline? So then the process 2 says, my deadline is 15. Okay. And the process 1 says, okay, I'm available at 12, but my deadline is 16 because the time period is 4. And this one, the time period is 5, but actually I already executed for 2. So the remaining time period is 3. That's 4. So this one, process 2, certainly has the earlier deadline, right? So the process 2 gonna continue. And then when process 2 finish and process 1 start to execute. So this time, at the time 12, process 2 continues. Process 2 is not kicked out by process 1. So the priority is not based on the period. Who has a short period will have the higher priority. That's not the case anymore for EDF. EDF basically is just say, okay, at any particular time, when both processes are available, I'm going to check who has the earliest deadline. Okay, who going to actually end the period first? And the process 2 certainly is the case in this. Okay, so that's called earliest deadline first scheduling. Now the question is, which scheduling algorithm is better? Which scheduling algorithm is better? Any idea?
Wouldn't EDF be more, I guess, practical? Since you have the deadlines coming up first, so you don't have a program that has one more time unit to finish the job getting cut off by like 5 other programs with higher priority.
Okay. I think both scheduling algorithms are very practical, but EDF is, I can say, more reasonable, it should be better, right? Because EDF just check which process has the urgency to finish. Because this process too, definitely the deadline, if I miss the 15 deadline, I'm finished. So you have to give me the CPU. And this other one says, okay, my deadline is 16. So I still have to, have more room to play. So certainly this one has a certain kind of urgency to complete. So in this case, process 2 has kind of urgency to complete, right? So it makes a little more sense in this case. Okay. Make sense? So the priority is based on who has the shorter remaining time. Okay. Now we talk about 2 processes. If you have 3 processes, 4 processes, if they are all real-time processes, they're going to be a mess because now they actually fight for the process. Now, so next one we're going to talk about is the performance of the algorithms. Okay. Now, real-time processes lie at the other extreme of time, criticality, okay, from batch process system, So the most important goal of the scheduling algorithm is to meet all deadlines. Make sure no one missed the deadline. No process missed the deadline. So all process, once you define the time period, each actual CPU burst has to be completed before the end of the time period. If you miss the time period, at least for this piece is finished. This piece is not really going to work. So it's just like when you play the real-time stream video. Basically, the video going to be actually, packed as a whole bunch of packages. You mail the first package, and this first package has to be played within a second, and then the send the next package. So one package after another. So typically for real-time video, there's a certain kind of buffer in the computer system. So when you actually send a package into the CPU, and if the CPU is currently processing something else, so you basically put this one in the buffer. But as far as the time, the period actually the deadline is not reached yet, it's fine. You can still keep that file in the buffer, but but you have to play the package before the deadline, because otherwise you're gonna see some kind of you have a problem with this, smoothness of the video. Okay. So so a schedule is feasible if the deadline of all process can be met. Okay. So that's the highest priority. Make sure each process meet its deadline. Okay. So let's say, suppose that when we talk about performance, let's say, suppose that a fraction of CPU time used by process I, like a process 1, process 2, process I, the fraction of the CPU time used by process I is this, Ti divided by Di. Now, Di is the period. Ti is the CPU burst. Okay. Total CPU time. And Di is the period of the process. Okay. So in that case, like this one, the fraction is 1/4. That's the CPU burst, and that's the period. And this is actually 3/5, right? Okay. Now, if the U, let's see, we can define U as the, let's see, what can I say? So you're going to define the U. I actually messed up the value, the part, the U. I think I missed the formula. I think the formula should be, let's check the formula here. Let me write the formula over here. Okay. I should actually insert certain actual formula here, that the U is U is T1 divided by D1 plus T2 divided by D2 plus T3 divided by D3. Depending on how many processes we're talking about. If you have a total of 10 processes, then T10 divided by D10. Okay. Okay. Now, if U equals 1, so that means this process 1 use this fraction of CPU. This process 2 use this fraction of CPU. Process 3 use this fraction of CPU. Process 10 use this fraction of CPU. But the problem is that you have to guarantee that the U actually should be less than or equal to 1, right? Because each fraction a process going to take, all the fractions added together never going to reach 100%, because that's the total. So if one process actually say the process 1 use 30% of CPU, process 2 use 30% of CPU, and process 3 use 30% of CPU, and the process 4 use 30% of CPU, that's not possible, because when you add all these together, you have 120%. So if then process 3, the maximum you can get is 10% of the CPU. So if the CPU actually is this, then each process is going to actually only use the fraction of the CPU time. So this is actually, U is called a CPU utilization, total CPU utilization. Now, If U equals 1, that means the CPU utilization is 100. That's perfect. However, for real-time application, CPU utilization 100 is really a bad idea. So the so normally you expected that the feasible scheduling existed as long as U is less than or equal to 1. But no schedule is feasible if U is greater than 1. So the total all the processes use more than 100% of 100% of CPU capacity. That's crazy. That's not possible. And if the total CPU time of all the processes would exist 100%, that's not possible. Okay. So EDF is optimal. Okay. It's the best in that a feasible schedule is always guaranteed as long as U is less than 1. And RAM is not guaranteed. Okay. So that's why EDF is the best. Okay. So I think that's pretty much all for today. So we actually talked about all the scheduling algorithm. So then next time we're gonna start to talk about how the process actually, these multiple processes coordinate, in the system, So also we're gonna have a test, as I mentioned. Test 1 is scheduled on Thursday. So it's actually gonna start at 11 o'clock, right after the class ends. Then the test is gonna begin. So, but the good thing about a remote class is that you have 13 hours time window to finish your test, but to start your test. So its timing is flexible, but for part 1, you have to finish within 1 hour once you start it. For part 2, you have 13 hours to work on. Make sure you download the questions, answer the questions, and upload the question back before the midnight on Thursday. Okay. Check the announcement on the blackboard. So make sure you don't miss anything. Okay. Any questions?
Yeah, are we actually coming to class